Cousin Trent tapped his glass at the party and said, "Let's be honest. Marisol's the family failure. We all know it." The room went quiet. Glasses stopped clinking. He had no idea who was sitting at the head of that table. "My name is Marisol. I'm 34 years old. I grew up the middle child in a loud, competitive Mexican-American family in San Antonio. 3 older cousins, 2 younger brothers, and a household where achievement was the only language anyone respected. I was the first in my immediate family to go to college. I was also the one who left before finishing because my mother got sick and somebody had to stay. Nobody asked me to, I just did it. After that, I built a life the only way I could. Freelance graphic design. Clients who paid 60 days late, projects that evaporated overnight, income that came in waves, no corner office, no LinkedIn title, no husband with a stable salary to smooth things over. I drove a 2011 Honda Civic and lived in a 2-bedroom apartment with a leaky kitchen faucet I fixed myself. Meanwhile, my cousins were getting promoted, getting married, buying houses in the suburbs. The family narrative about me was gentle but consistent, sweet girl. Such a shame, never quite landed. They said it was soft eyes and tilted heads, like I was a plant that hadn't bloomed yet. I wasn't rich, I wasn't polished. But I had spent 5 quiet years building something nobody knew about. If you've ever been the one your family quietly wrote off, you already know exactly how Marisol felt walking into that room. Have people ever underestimated you because your success didn't look like theirs? Subscribe so you never miss a story like this. Click like if you're already feeling it. The party was held at a rented event hall on the north side of the city. String lights, round tables with white linens, a DJ setting up in the corner. Trent was celebrating his engagement to a woman named Brianna, and the whole extended family had turned out. Aunts and uncles I hadn't seen in 2 years. Family friends who remembered me as a teenager. And seated at the head of the main table, our great-uncle Dominic, who had flown in from Houston specifically for the occasion. He was 78 years old, rarely attended family events, and when he did, people noticed. I arrived alone. Simple black dress, clean shoes, small gold earrings. Trent's side of the room was color-coordinated. His fiancée's family wore matching shades of blush. His groomsmen were in slim blazers. I found my seat, said my hellos, and poured myself a glass of water. The toast started normally. Trent stood up, clinked his glass, and began talking about himself. His promotion, his new home, his beautiful fiancée. The room was warm and applauding. I was genuinely happy to sit quietly through it. Then he turned. "But you know what I also want to say?" He smiled like he was being charming. "Not everyone in this family has the same drive, and I think we all know who I mean." He looked directly at me. "Marisol, 34, still doing little doodles for clients who don't pay you. At some point, sweetheart, that's on you." A few people laughed. Brianna smiled nervously at her plate. 2 of my aunts looked away. One uncle nodded slowly, like Trent had said something true. Under the table, my mother found my hand. "Don't react," she whispered. I didn't. I picked up my water glass and took a slow sip. But across the table, great-uncle Dominic set down his fork. He didn't say a word. He simply looked at Trent with an expression I couldn't fully read. The laughter faded faster than it should have. Something had shifted in the room, and nobody quite understood why. 3 days after the party, my mother called me. "Did you know about the wedding planning group chat?" she asked. I didn't, because I wasn't in it. Trent had added every cousin, both his sisters, 3 family friends, and somehow forgotten me. When I asked his sister about it directly, she said, "We just didn't think you'd want to be involved." I told her I would have liked to be asked. She changed the subject. A week later, there was a brunch. I brought a hostess gift, a ceramic serving bowl I'd picked out carefully. Aunt Gloria accepted it with a tight smile, and then, not 20 minutes later, I heard her across the kitchen telling one of her friends that I do little arts and crafts jobs online, and that I'd never quite found my footing. The friend found me by the coffee station and asked, with genuine concern, whether I'd ever thought about going back to school, whether I'd considered finding something more stable. I smiled. I said I was keeping my options open. Then came Trent. He approached me privately 2 days before the wedding, voice low and reasonable. He said he wanted to offer me paid work, wedding invitations, programs, the full suite of printed materials. "I know you need the work," he said, "and it would be good exposure." I quoted him my actual rate. He laughed, not a cruel laugh, Worse than that, a pitying one. Come on, don't be proud right now, Marisol. I'm trying to help you. I thanked him and declined. By the next afternoon, 3 relatives had heard that I'd refused to help with the wedding and was being difficult. I stopped explaining myself after the second call. I started paying closer attention instead, watching who repeated the story, watching who didn't, watching who asked me how I was actually doing. The list of people who asked was short. Petra was on it. What none of them knew was that for 3 years I had been running a design studio under a brand name. No photos of me on the website. No personal branding, just clean, precise work delivered on time at professional rates. I had chosen that invisibility carefully. After years of family commentary on every small thing I did or didn't do, I decided my real work wasn't theirs to weigh in on. Not yet. The studio had grown steadily. I had 2 contractors I worked with regularly. I had corporate clients on retainer. I had waiting list. I had kept all of it completely to myself. I had been invisible to them by choice, and that choice was about to matter more than I ever planned. There was one other thing I hadn't told anyone. After the engagement party, Great-Uncle Dominic had called me. It was a short call. He asked how I was. Asked what I'd been working on. I gave him a vague answer, which was habit, and he didn't push. He simply said, "I'm glad we talked. I'll be in touch." I thought it was just the kind of thing an older relative says and forgets. I didn't think about it again, but he had. The guest of honor knew something, and he was already deciding what to do with it. Petra had been at the engagement party, standing near the back when Trent made his toast. She texted me that same night. What he did was disgusting. I'm sorry I didn't say something. We hadn't talked in almost a year, but that text opened something back up. Petra was 29, lived in Portland, worked for a nonprofit focused on housing access. The family considered her the other one who hadn't quite made it. She was warm and sharp, and had a long memory for the dynamics none of us talked about openly. We got on a call the following week, and she said something I hadn't expected. She told me that before this trip, Great-Uncle Dominic had called her too. He'd asked about me specifically. What had I been doing? Whether I was well. She said she'd told him the truth, that I was talented and serious, and that the family had always underestimated me. Meanwhile, Trent posted about the wedding on social media, a long caption about the event being a reflection of everything this family has built. He tagged our grandmother, both his sisters, 4 cousins by name. The tag list was long. My name was not on it. Aunt Gloria began telling people, quietly, that I had always struggled with jealousy, that the tension around me was really about my own unresolved feelings toward Trent's success. She was patient about it, methodical. She was rewriting the story in real time. Then the formal invitation arrived. White envelope, calligraphy on the front. I opened it and found my name placed at table 11. The children's table. Literally. It seated myself, 2 12-year-olds, a teenager, and someone's college-age niece who didn't speak much English. I sat with that for about 10 minutes. Then I put the invitation on my kitchen counter, made a cup of coffee, and looked out my window at the parking lot below. I wasn't angry anymore. I was clear. The wedding was held on a Saturday afternoon. The ceremony was followed by a reception and a ballroom that smelled faintly of gardenias and candle wax. I arrived on time, wearing a deep green dress I'd bought months earlier for a client dinner. I found table 11 without being escorted. I introduced myself to the teenagers seated there and asked the youngest one about her summer. She told me she was learning to code. I told her that was excellent. Trent's toast came during dinner. He stood up, microphone in hand, and he took his time. He talked about legacy, about the family name and what it meant to carry it forward. He looked around the room as he listed people, naming cousins, naming his sisters, saying what each one represented to him. His voice was warm and full and deliberate. He went through almost every person at the main tables. He did not say my name. I watched Great-Uncle Dominic during the toast. He was seated at the main table, straight-backed, hands folded in his lap, his expression unreadable. When Trent finished and the room applauded, Dominic did not applaud. He waited. Then he stood up. The room noticed immediately. 78 years old, with the kind of presence that doesn't need volume to command attention. Someone near the front gestured for the microphone to be passed to him. "I want to make an announcement," he said. His voice was steady and unhurried. I had planned to share this privately, in a smaller setting. But after last month's party, I decided this family should hear it together. The room was completely still. Even the servers near the far wall had stopped moving. He said that for the past 40 years he had run a regional print and media company. He said the company was still strong, but that he was no longer young, and that he had been looking, carefully, and without any rush, for the right person to take over its creative direction. I found that person 2 years ago, he said. I was a client of hers. I used a company name. I didn't tell her who I was. He paused. I needed to know the work was real before I told her anything else. It was real. It was some of the finest design work I had ever contracted. He looked across the room and found my table. Her name is Marisol. A sound moved through the room. Not applause. Something more confused than that. Chairs shifting. Whispered names. He continued. I didn't hire her because she's family. I hired her because she was the best I found. And then I found out she was mine. He turned his gaze slowly, without hurry, toward the front table. I almost didn't come to this party. I'm glad I did. Now I know more about this family than I did before. Trent's face had gone completely white. Aunt Gloria's champagne glass was still raised halfway to her lips and never made it further. I stood up. I walked across the room to my great-uncle, and I hugged him. He held on for a moment longer than I expected. When I stepped back, I turned and looked at the room, at every face watching me, and I said, I would have told you all eventually. I just wasn't ready. Then I sat back down. The 12-year-old next to me leaned over and whispered, That was so cool. I told her to keep learning to code. The weeks after the wedding were quieter than I expected. I met with Dominic's team in Houston twice, went through financials, reviewed the client roster, sat in on a production meeting. It was real work, complex and demanding and nothing like a fairy tale. I was learning the business from the inside, which meant I was often the least informed person in the room, which was uncomfortable in exactly the way that mattered. Trent sent a text message 11 days after the wedding. It said, Congratulations. One word, nothing else. I read it, set my phone face down on my desk, and went back to the proposal I was drafting. Aunt Gloria called my mother. She said the family was so proud of me that they always knew I had something special in me. My mother listened politely and then told her, in the gentlest voice she has, that it was a little late for that. Petra drove down from Portland the following month. We had dinner at a small restaurant near my apartment, the kind of place with low lighting and the sound of soft music and kitchen noise blending together. She ordered the same thing I did without realizing it, and we both laughed. I told her she was the one I had always respected most in the family. She looked at the table for a moment, then looked back at me and said, That means a lot, more than you know. They called me the family failure. But failure was never my story. It was just the story they needed to tell so they didn't have to look at themselves. The guest of honor stood up, and so did I. If someone has ever reduced her whole life to one dismissive label, failure, lost, aimless, this story is for you. Have you ever been underestimated by the people who were supposed to believe in you first? Drop your story in the comments. You're not alone in this. Click like to help this story reach others who need it. The loudest people in the room are rarely the most powerful. Sometimes the person they overlooked is the one quietly changing everything. If this story moved you, share it with someone who's been underestimated. Subscribe for more stories about real people who refuse to stay small. A new story drops soon, and trust me, you won't see the ending coming.